When you write copy, you are building a story. You want your story to be read in full by those who are your prospects. The chances are they have no desire to hear your story because they have no idea that your story is of interest to them. It is far safer always to assume that they are totally disinterested. We meet this lack of interest with our conviction that our product or service fits the needs of our prospects and is worth its price. Therefore, our endeavor is first to get their interest, then to hold it. Our methods are at all times those of seduction. Once upon a time in a kingdom far away, a fairy prince jumped upon his snow-white charger and rode off to slay dragons. Today in New York City, thousands of taxicabs are burning up an awful lot of gasoline because of our insane desire for speed. Those two paragraphs have 5 elements in common. Reread them and see what you can spot before you read further. We have discussed at some length the importance of making the headline, the layout, and the illustration force a reading of the first paragraph by those who are our prospects. We shall now begin to consider how the copy gets built to hold the reader's interest and get itself read from first paragraph to last. The fact that we have tricked or seduced our prospects into beginning to read our copy does not mean that we can count on their now wanting to read all of it. The seduction must continue from start to finish. The sequence must be so right that the reader is never conscious of the act of reading. The 5 elements to be found in the 2 paralleled sentences above tell us a great deal about how to clinch the reader's interest, how to get them through the first paragraph and into the second. The 5 elements in the 2 paralleled sentences are when, where, who, what, why. If the story you are telling has all the elements of when, where, who, what, why, and if all those elements are equally important and perhaps equally news, then present your plot in that sequence. If, on the other hand, any one of the 5 elements has special news value, special attention-getting value, lead off with that element and follow it with the other 4 in the order named. Compare, for example. Yesterday, a man named Smith with Hitler died yesterday. Sometimes the story you have to tell does not include all 5 elements. Don't create the missing elements artificially. Whether you have 3 elements or 5 elements, unless your preliminary fact-finding has dictated otherwise, present the elements you have in the sequence indicated. We can have faith in the strength of this sequence as a means of getting and holding our readers' attention if we recognize the fact that it has behind it centuries of fairy tales and folklore. Are you familiar with Damon Runyon's stories? If your answer is no, please remedy the situation. If your answer is yes, then the question before the house is, what makes them so vivid? To which the answer is many things, including the predominant use of the present tense. If we are to fulfill Brisbane's prescription of writing that is easier to read than to skip, we must get action into our stories. No tense suggests action as vividly as the present tense. Try never to let your copy promise that your product or service can, will, might, could, would, or should do something for the reader. Make your prospect know that your product does do what you claim for it. Old Dutch cleanser chases dirt. Not. Old Dutch cleanser might conceivably remove the accumulated filth if properly applied. Along with the use of the present tense, use the singular whenever possible instead of the plural. It is usually easier to visualize one horse, one cake of soap, one man, than any of these interesting subjects in the mass. Be specific rather than abstract. Right and wrong, good and evil, temperance, strength, dignity, power, all are mighty concepts, and all are abstracts. Almost any specific instance of any of these abstracts is at once more vivid and easier to grasp, and leads to exactly the same moral. Use active verbs and pictorial nouns. Active verbs suggest action. Pictorial nouns paint word pictures. Vivid writing, suggesting action, painting word pictures, keeps your prospect reading. By the same token, you then require fewer adjectives and adverbs except numbers and colors. The writing of an amateur is always marked by the excessive use of adjectives and adverbs. In support of most of the foregoing, ponder the following sentence from How Green Was My Valley. A blackbird putting loops and twists in his voice, and thrushes shouting in the grass, and blueness coming to the sky, holding the reader's interest. By the arresting power of our headline, assisted by the layout and the main illustration. We select from our audience those who are prospects for our product or service. This arresting power must be great enough to force a reading of the first paragraph. At this moment, we have caught our prospect's attention. Now we must hold it. We hold our reader's attention. First, by what we say. Second, by how we say it. Several forthcoming sections will be devoted to what to say. We must never hope that the grace of our writing can, in any way, be a substitute for having nothing to say. Facts and ideas sell our wares for us. How we present them determines whether our facts and ideas get a full hearing and full consideration. Copy must foster action, the mental action and the physical action, which lead to the purchase of our wares. Therefore, copy must suggest action. Once again, it will be our facts and ideas which produce the action. But our manner of telling our story can include the suggestion of action. The suggestion of action is produced in large part by the use of the present tense, of the singular instead of the plural, of the concrete rather than the abstract, of active verbs and pictorial nouns. Perhaps we can further clarify what is needed by remembering this simple injunction. Always write to the eye. Our message is addressed to the instincts or the senses or the pocketbook nerve, or whatever our fact-finding has dictated. But it is important at all times to remember that the delivery of a printed message is through the eye of our prospect. Whatever eases the work of the eye aids in the delivery of the message. Whatever increases the work of the eye jeopardizes the delivery of the message. This means familiar words, short sentences, and simple sentence construction. It also means punctuation. Let us consider these weapons in a little greater detail. Familiar words are obviously words that are familiar to the particular types of people who are prospects for what we are selling. This means that we must talk the language of those to whom we are writing. We must have full command of the language of those to whom we are writing. We must never talk down to them. We must never talk up to them. We must talk directly to them, as equals. Our prospects must never detect any artificiality in our speech. One of the greatest byproducts of doing the hat trick is in getting to know, or in verifying, the kinds of words our prospects use when they are in the mood to be prospects for our wares. Vocabulary research is a vital part of our fact-finding job. Short sentences look easier to read, induce a reading. We are amused by the rule of German grammar, which puts the verb at the end of the sentence, making us wait until the end to find out what the action is. Yet in English, we are all too prone to get into involved sentence construction, almost equally hard to grasp. Short, simple, declarative sentences should constitute the majority of your sentences. Avoid dependent clauses and phrases wherever possible. Don't start a sentence with a long, hanging group of words, which has no significance until many other words have been read and remembered, and related back to what you started with. Use subjunctive and gerundive constructions just as little as possible. Wherever you find an and or a but in your copy, stop and consider whether the substitution of a period or a semicolon wouldn't be an improvement. Intelligent punctuation can be kind and inviting to the eye. Inadequate punctuation can almost forbid a reading. Intelligent punctuation breaks your message up into small doses, easily assimilated. Perhaps we can mix our metaphors and say that the eye will keep on reading if it sees a resting place or a breathing place just shortly ahead. Then, refreshed, the eye has the strength to tackle the next group of words you offer. Or we can say that metaphors are no good and still fight for more punctuation on the grounds that intelligent punctuation clarifies your meaning. You cannot afford to have your prospect stop and wonder, how do you mean that? You are apt to lose his interest if he has to check back to verify the antecedent, or to get a fresh start on some involved bit of verbiage. Old Aesop Glim has a fondness for mixed metaphors. Let's say that intelligent punctuation does provide resting places which are inviting to the eye, and that it does provide signposts which help to make our meaning clear. We have more than periods and commas with which to work. We also have dots, dashes, and parentheses. In many cases, dots, commas, dashes, and parentheses are interchangeable. Variation not only spices your punctuation, if you are consistent in your method of variation, you vary your emphasis. In any given piece of copy, use parentheses just one way. Use dashes another way. Thereupon, you give everything between parentheses one set of values and everything between dashes another set of values. Most important, don't ever, and don't ever means never. Use so much punctuation, no matter how great the temptation, that you get the effect and run the risk of having your effect called affected of measles or smallpox. Don't use so many dashes that you get called a dash hound. Now, by way of an assignment, take any piece of writing you have ever done, some piece you particularly admire, go back and cut out these words. A, him, she, her, it, this, that. They, them, these, those. Good, very, best, perfect. Regarding good, very, best, there is no synonym you can use for any of these three which will not clarify your meaning. Nothing is perfect, and once again, any word you use in its place will be an improvement. Regarding the rest of the forbidden words, you will have to try not using them in order really to know what you gain whenever you don't use them. We must at all times remember that every written message, every piece of copy which is to appear in print, is addressed to the eye of our prospect. It is not written to be read aloud. At the same time, we must recognize and never forget the paradox that each and every piece of copy has its own particular tone of voice. The primary gauge for this tone of voice is to be found in the basic importance of our message itself. Always ask yourself this question: how important is our message to our prospect? There are many subjects on which our prospect feels strongly, deeply, even emotionally. These are subjects which bear upon his highest ideals, or his pocketbook nerve, or possibly on his own quite private fetishes. There may be sound reasons or foolish reasons why he takes these matters so seriously. Those reasons don't concern us directly. Most of the time it is sufficient to know from our fact-finding that a certain subject is a serious subject to our prospect. Given that knowledge, we must be certain that whatever we write, bearing on that subject, is written in a correspondingly sober and serious tone of voice. There is many another subject which our prospect will never take too seriously. To him, some subjects are light and airy, or delightful, or pleasantly amusing, or downright funny. Once again, given the knowledge of just how lightly our prospect holds a particular subject, we must be certain that whatever we write, touching on that subject, is written in a matching tone of voice. It is our job to deliver to our prospect a message regarding our wares. We must face the fact that we have virtually no chance of his accepting that message, unless the tone of voice in which we write exactly matches the degree of importance our prospect attaches to the subject. All of which, once said, is almost too obvious. However, a little research on your own part will quickly show you that most of the time, the advertisements that don't quite ring true are the advertisements in which the copywriter has been either more ponderous or more frivolous than his subject justifies. There is considerable evidence that much of the wartime institutional advertising irritated and offended our men in the services. One little drop of ink has often made the whole world think. Yes and no. It was the writing with the pen, in the hand of a thinker, which made the world do some thinking. The thinker needed the ink, but the ink did not produce the thoughts. Wherefore, an ink manufacturer who claimed that his ink helped to win the war would be overstating the importance of his wares, and he would be doomed to be detected and discredited. Fortunately, no ink manufacturer appears to have been guilty of this crime. But do we need to point fingers to indicate dozens of parallel crimes? The hairdresser behind the girl behind the man behind the gun quickly builds up into top-heavy absurdity. The question of humor in advertising copy is one that has often been debated. Is it safe to be funny? By the yardsticks indicated in the foregoing paragraphs, the answer writes itself. If a humorous twist produces the right tone of voice, then it is the only right mode of expression. It has always seemed to old Aesop Glim that the perfect use of humor in advertising copy has been exemplified over many years by the flit advertisements. We may argue quite truthfully that flies and mosquitoes represent a serious menace to our health and to public welfare. We could easily write ponderous flit copy which dealt with germs and bacteria. We would be quite accurate in all the most horrible claims we could make on such scores. But two quite different facts throw the balance of the scales in the other direction. The first is that, to most of us most of the time, flies and mosquitoes are a pest rather than a menace. The second and greater fact is that the conflict between a human being and an insect does not in any way resemble Goliath and David. The human being outsizes the insect by 1,000,000 to 1. The humorous treatment pictures the situation to perfection. By way of an assignment, write a piece of copy on any product you know something about. Don't invent either the product or the facts about the product. In the headline and in the copy, practice all the precepts that have been set forth up to this point. Observe the rules. Don't hunt for the exceptions. What to say and how to say it. Always remember that those are two separate problems. We start with the conviction that no one wants to read an advertisement, that it is our job to outwit or seduce our prospects, to catch and hold their attention from the instant their eyes first glimpse our advertisement, clear through to the time when they have read the last word of our copy. We can make a summary of our requirements with a group of convenient and useful threesomes. Our first threesome is, our advertisement must get itself seen, read, believed. Unless all three of these things happen, our advertisement is less successful than it could be. We can paraphrase these three by saying that it is our job to give our advertisement arresting power. Make it easy to read. Keep it truthful, convincing. Our advertisement gets itself seen through layout, illustration, and headline. These three elements working together must have the arresting power to catch the attention of those who are prospects for our wares and force them into a reading of the first paragraph of our copy. Our advertisement gets itself read, 1, if it has a logical sequence of ideas, 2, if it is written in words that are familiar to our prospects, 3, if it has simple sentence structure and helpful punctuation. Sequence of ideas will concern us in forthcoming sections. All other precepts thus far listed have been discussed at length. Our advertisement gets itself believed, P1, when it has facts which carry conviction, 2, when it neither maximizes nor minimizes the importance of our wares, 3, when it omits all superlatives for which the advertiser is the authority. Facts which carry conviction are facts which do not challenge belief. Strangely enough, our criterion is not the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We want the truth, but only as much of it as our prospect is ready to believe. This means that if our wares have unexpected virtues, greater than our prospects are likely to believe, we must recognize that fact and elect one of two courses. We can temper our claims, pull our punches, say only as much as we know our prospects will believe. Quite often, this will still leave us with ample selling power. If we can sell by underselling, we have made a gain. Whenever a prospect becomes a buyer and finds that what he has bought actually does more than was claimed for it, he is very far from disappointed. He becomes a booster. He talks about our wares and helps us sell them to other people. Our second alternative is to be certain that the facts which are hard to believe are always supported by evidence which makes them believable. If your fact is hard to believe, quote an authority who is easy to believe. In short, never make an unsupported claim, no matter how truthful, which challenges belief. The quick answer on avoiding all superlatives for which the advertiser is the authority is, get somebody else to say it for you. This may mean a testimonial from a satisfied customer. It may be the report of tests conducted by independent testing laboratories or university or government authorities. It may be the official report of some record-breaking performance, such as a new coast-to-coast automobile record. None of the last 4 paragraphs is intended to imply that copy must be written down to dull monotony, lest it challenge belief. The advertiser is expected to be proud of his wares, enthusiastic about them. If he doesn't think they're good, why should the buyer consider them? It is the copywriter's job to steer the happy middle course between a wholly desirable enthusiasm and a set of extravagant claims which challenge belief. Unfortunately, this is not the kind of challenge which makes our prospects risk their money, in the hopes of being able to prove that the advertiser was a liar. There is a further alternative on how to support a hard-to-believe fact. This method is the money back if not satisfied. However, this plan involves various business and legal decisions which are frequently outside the copywriter's province. Let us not gloss over a testimonial from a satisfied customer. If the satisfied customer is a person like the prospect, or a person the prospect would like to be like, then the testimonial frequently becomes the one most powerful form of advertising you can employ. It's pretty hard to beat a copy story which says, here's a person like you, or a person you'd like to be like, who has paid the price we ask for our wares and who likes our wares well enough to be quoted. By way of an assignment, write a piece of copy on any product you know something about. Don't invent either the product or the facts about the product. In the headline and in the copy, practice all the precepts that have been set forth up to the present. Observe the rules, don't hunt for the exceptions. We write advertisements in order to make certain people think certain thoughts and/or take certain actions. We write with the idea of persuading our prospects to think as we do on a given subject. In order to achieve this highly desirable state of affairs, it is necessary to get the reader involved in what we write. It is our job to catch his attention and to get him interested in our subject, so thoroughly interested that our thoughts become his thoughts. The primary definitions of involve in Funk and Wagnall's College Standard Dictionary provide some excellent ground rules for our job. 1. To draw into entanglement, literally or figuratively, embroil. 2. To include, imply, or necessitate as a part or adjunct. 3. To enwrap, enfold, envelop with, or as with surrounding matter, hence to engross, occupy, as in study. The fact-finding which precedes the writing of our copy is, of course, calculated to help us write accurately. The fact-finding helps us to decide what to talk about and what not to talk about, gives us a picture of a composite prospect to whom to write, tells us something about our prospect's vocabulary and the degree of importance our prospect attaches to the subject on which we are writing. Building on this solid foundation, the job is now wholly in the hands of the copywriter and the artist. And there are many devices we can employ to make the reader identify himself with our message. First, let us consider the illustration. We can move in several directions. If we're writing about foods or about kitchen equipment of some sort, we can have our composite prospect pictured in her kitchen. Our illustration must be so realistic that our housewife prospect sees herself in the situation. Or we can picture just her kitchen, or perhaps only a small part of her kitchen. In our illustration, there will be familiar, homey objects that quickly create the identification. She recognizes her kitchen in our illustration. She is familiar with her kitchen and feels at home in it. She is now predisposed to have confidence in the food product or kitchen equipment in which we seek to interest her. By the same token, if our prospect is a man, we can picture him in his place of work, or in his garage or garden or easy chair. Or we can picture the familiar setting to him without putting him into the illustration. Moving in an entirely different direction, we can offer our prospect a picture of the kind of person he or she would like to be. A picture of the real or imaginary person whom our prospect most admires, socially, sociably, or in a business way. Or we can, of course, picture merely the possessions of that person. If our prospect discovers that our wares are associated with the person he or she admires, our prospect becomes at least partially predisposed to associate our wares with himself or herself. As for the headline, the all-time high in headline construction, calculated to get the reader involved, is, "Now you too can." Of course, our fact-finding must have proved that our composite prospect already wants to. Don't use "now you too can" unless you're sure it fits. But do try to get "you" into the headline whenever the nature of your message permits you to do so. When you get into the copy itself, there are at least 3 dependable devices for getting or keeping you, the prospect, involved in your message. First, be sure you are speaking the prospect's own language. Use the vocabulary your prospect uses. Tell your story in familiar words and phrases. As we've previously discussed, your copy research should include vocabulary research. Not only should your whole story be written in the prospect's language, but you should seek to use the particular words or expressions your prospect uses when speaking of the particular subject of your copy. Second, as early as possible, get your copy concentrated on you, the prospect, how your wares fit into your prospect's life, needs, or pleasures. Third, use the present tense just as much as you possibly can. Don't talk about what your wares or services may, might, can, could, will, would, shall, or should do for him. Tell him what they do. Make him feel that what you offer is already going on. If you combine the present tense with you, the prospect, and use familiar words and phrases, your prospect soon begins to feel that what you offer is already happening to him. When he gets to the end of your message, he won't be happy until he makes it true. By way of an assignment, try your hand at planning an illustration, writing a headline, and some copy, in all of which you make the maximum effort to get the reader involved in your message. Don't pull your punches. Overdo it, if necessary. Build the advertisement around a product or service you know something about, or one on which you can secure the facts. Don't waste your time writing about an imaginary product or service. Once upon a time, there was an advertiser who had the money to do everything exactly as he wished. If he wanted to talk to high school students, he could afford to have special high school student advertisements in special high school student magazines. If he wanted to talk to business executives, he could afford special business executive advertisements in special business executive publications. And so on and so on, for every type of customer he had and for every kind of retailer and wholesaler. What this all meant, of course, was that he could go the limit in always talking in the exact language of each particular audience, and in always using exactly the kind of illustration that would be most appealing. He had plenty of customers and plenty of money for advertising and never had to think about economies or compromises. Possibly there was once such an advertiser. Possibly old Aesop Glim has misled you. Most of your life you will be faced with the need for compromises and economies in the preparation of advertising campaigns. You will be forced to write advertisements which are equally applicable to several audiences at one time. Either because the art and production costs would run too high to prepare special advertisements for each kind of publication, or because you can't afford enough different publications. You may be limited to the use of a few publications of mass circulation, which means reaching many different audiences simultaneously. Let us assume, for instance, that we are faced with the task of preparing advertisements on rubber boots, and that we are not in the fortunate position of being able to prepare special advertisements for each of our various audiences. For the sake of our argument, we will assume that we seek to reach men only, but men in several different walks of life and in different occupations. Many miners practically live in rubber boots. Many miners are immigrants, speaking very little English. Street cleaners and firemen are frequent users of rubber boots. Each of these types has a larger vocabulary than the miners. Then, whether for weather protection or just for fishing perhaps, we can figure that we have several additional audiences of users of rubber boots, such as the storekeeper who sells the boots and the salesman who sells the boots to the storekeeper. Once again, wider vocabularies and greatly different viewpoints toward our boots. We may assume that school teachers and college professors are potential customers and have still wider vocabularies. Finally, self-made businessmen have the widest vocabularies of all. They get around more than do most school teachers and college professors. We have now suggested 7 different types of prospects for our rubber boots, each with a different width of vocabulary. Now, let us assume that we have to write one advertisement, which we hope will interest all 7 types. The fundamental at stake is, write accurately at the lowest vocabulary level at which you have an appreciable number of prospective customers. In this particular case, the miners represent the lowest English vocabulary level, and they therefore set our standard for us. Obviously, our message must show in the simplest language and picture the usefulness, the long wear, and the comfortableness of our boots. We may safely assume that while all our audiences do not require the maximum degree of ruggedness in their boots, they will all respond to appeals that are basically masculine, appeals which make them feel more masculine when wearing our boots. Similarly, if your subject is industrial equipment or supplies, you can be sure that the chief engineer and the newest mechanic both want your wares for the same basic reasons. And if it's food or drugs, you can be sure that Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Van Bibben have the same basic emotions toward their respective families. In short, when you are faced with a problem of this nature, write basically, stick to fundamentals. Hope that the fundamentals are sufficiently basic to interest your more sophisticated audiences. Never hope that a message written to sophisticates will be effective downward to the lower vocabulary levels. For your personal information, and in case you want to get ahead in the business world, there is a close connection between the size of your vocabulary and your ability to get ahead. This is borne out by several of the methods of measuring aptitudes that have been developed in recent years at Stevens Institute, for example. You can increase your vocabulary by widening the scope of your reading. The more subjects you read about, the more words you will learn. Or you can take the dictionary or the encyclopedia in small daily doses. You can also buy yourself a copy of the Johnson O'Connor Vocabulary Builder. On his long gray beard, old Aesop Glim herewith presumes to list what he considers the mistakes most frequently made by beginners in the art of copywriting. Said list, if you are a beginner, probably bearing a strong resemblance to the mistakes you have been making in your assignments thus far. Topping the list of errors is the use of opening sentences that are much too long, such as the one above. Watch for long sentences in your writing, particularly in the opening paragraphs. Long sentences are hard to read because it is hard to keep track of their construction. Whenever you find a sentence that is too long, look for the ands and buts. You can frequently substitute a period for an and or a but. If you don't find any ands or buts, reconstruct your whole story into shorter sentences. You are far safer to work always on the assumption that no one wants to read your copy. Therefore, how you say it is almost as important as what you say. Probably most of the mistakes made by beginners are those of making their writing harder than necessary to read. You must work for easy reading. You must avoid everything that can either slow up the reading or send your reader off on some sideline of thought. Along with sentences that are too long is the use of sentences that are too involved in their construction. Don't start a sentence with a long dependent clause or phrase, such as being desirous of assuaging my thirst, I decided to. Be careful about the use of phrases as nouns, such as topping the list of errors is. As to headlines, too many questions, too many commands. It is human nature to try to think up an answer to a question. The process of thinking up the answer reduces the chances of getting your copy read. It is human nature to resent commands. Resentment can prevent a reading of your copy. Still on headlines. Beware of false caps. When you put a capital initial on every word of a headline, you are employing unfamiliar typography. Your reader accepts the unfamiliar more slowly than he accepts the familiar. You are also making the mistake of giving each word equal emphasis, whereas there are usually some words that ought to have more emphasis than others. If you emphasize everything, you actually emphasize nothing. Still on headlines. Break for sense. Many times your headline is too long to be reproduced on a single line. It is the copywriter rather than the layout man who should decide how to break the headline into 1, 2, or 3 lines. Breaking for sense means knowing that none of the shorter lines thus produced will become a confusing combination of words or a humorous combination. Several common mistakes can be covered by one broad injunction. Use active verbs and pictorial nouns. Active verbs suggest action. They make your copy vivid and readable. The most active verbs of all are those in the present tense. Active verbs in the present tense make your reader feel that something is going on, something is happening, something he ought to know about. Pictorial nouns paint word pictures. As with the present tense, so with the singular rather than the plural. One of anything is usually easier to visualize than multiples. Multiples have a tendency to become abstractions. Still on pictorial nouns. Stick to the specific and the concrete. Your reader can't visualize power or dignity or prestige 1/10 as easily as he can visualize the simplest specific example of any of these. Frequently, it is apparent in a beginner's copy that the writer is himself confused. If the writer does not have his story clear in his own head before he starts writing, there is very little hope that he will make the story clear to his reader. Get the story straight in your own mind before you start telling it to someone else. Two other sources of confusion in copy have somewhat similar origins. The first is the writer's own confusion as to the reader's degree of interest in his subject. Too much copy is written entirely from the writer's point of view. He is full of his story, convinced of the virtue of his wares, but he has failed to give much thought to the reader's interest. Most good selling starts on the prospect's side of the desk. Before you can pound home the virtues of your wares, you must register an understanding of your prospect's needs. Base your approach upon his selfish interest. A somewhat allied source of confusion in copy results from the writer's failure to say what he had in mind. The teller may be full of his story, convinced of its importance. But if it's all news to the hearer, you can hardly hope to put across the whole story unless you tell the whole story. Too frequently, the writer fails to get onto the paper what he had in his head, or possibly he gets only part of it onto the paper. You can be sure that your reader can't take any more off the paper than you put onto it. Always ask yourself, have I really said what I mean? Have I said enough to make the reader feel as I feel? Verbal fluency, including the excessive use of adjectives and adverbs, is no substitute for facts. A good deal of copy seems to be written in the belief that adjectives and adverbs have power in themselves. This is true only to a degree. Many of the most powerful pieces of copy are notably lacking in adjectives and adverbs. Finally, on the subject of making copy hard to read, a too frequent crime is the use of stilted, unfamiliar language. This principle is the same as with unfamiliar typography. It is your aim to have the reader get your story as easily and as rapidly as possible. Certainly, this means that you must talk his language. You must never talk down to your reader, and even without any thought of talking down to him, you may use words whose meaning he does not quickly grasp. Whereupon he stops and puzzles. Heaven help you if he goes to the dictionary to look up the meaning of one of your words. Of course, the most important cause of poor copy is faulty sequence. And that is why the next chapter of this book is the most important of all. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to go deep down into the rabbit hole of marketing and persuasion, click the link in the description where you will find many fundamental books about copywriting, psychology, and persuasion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.